They turned the peace talks into a trap. Humanity came prepared. Malakar's hand had stopped moving the moment the human delegation walked in without speaking. He stood on the high dais of Ethelgard Station, his platinum signet ring turning slow circles between his thumb and forefinger, and he watched 42 people take their seats below the kinetic barrier as if they had arrived for a routine census review. No visible tension in their shoulders. No eye contact with the security fields humming along the chamber walls. No conversation among themselves. That bothered him briefly. He dismissed it. At 0947 Summit Standard, Malakar pressed the seal authorization on his personal console. The perimeter fields of Ethelgard locked with a sound like a single low chord struck on a metal string, one clean note, then nothing. The station's outer docking collars disengaged from the human transports still moored at berths 7, 8, and 9. Tractor webs locked onto the 3 unarmed vessels. Outside, through the clear structural ports along the upper gallery, the system was already full of gray 4,200 volleys heavy dreadnoughts sitting at anchor, blocking every exit vector for 11 million kilometers in every direction. 42 diplomats, 4,200 warships. Malakar found the math clean. He lifted the data glass tablet from the stand beside him, a single sheet of parchment-thin material etched with the full vassalage integration accords, and descended 2 steps so that the delegation could see it clearly. His military attaché, Drev, moved to the railing and keyed the acoustic relay. The synthetic chiming undertone of Malakar's high-cast vocal augmentation filled the chamber. "You have had 11 years," Malakar said. 11 years of our patience, of our tariff allowances, of our willingness to treat your species as a developmental case rather than an administrative problem. You have used that time to retreat, to concede, to shrink. He set the data glass down on the forward ledge of the dais, facing them. So we are here to finish the accounting. Envoy Vance, seated at the center of the human row, did not move. He was a silver-haired man of perhaps 60, and he sat with both hands resting flat on the table in front of him, the way a person sits when they have been told explicitly not to touch anything. He looked at Malakar. He did not blink more than usual. He did not look at the security fields or at the warships outside or at the tablet. He looked at Malakar the way someone looks at a clock they have already checked twice and found accurate. "True sovereigns," Malakar said, "do not negotiate with beasts. They lease them their survival." Vance said nothing. "Stay close. You are going to want to hear how the next 12 minutes end." 3 months earlier, the Hegemony's Strategic Assessment Division had filed its final report on the human species. Malakar had read it on a Tuesday morning with his first cup of heated mineral water, and he had found it thorough, accurate, and entirely unsurprising. The report ran to 40 pages and reached its conclusion on the 3rd. Humanity was broken. Not militarily destroyed, that would have required effort. Simply broken in the way that young, emotionally governed species tended to break when the volley's hegemony applied 11 years of slow, calculated pressure to their expansion corridors. Border concessions, tariff enforcement, 3 staged withdrawals from the Orion resource spur, each one documented and filed into the hegemony's predictive models. The algorithms had seen it hundreds of times across 6 millennia. A species fights, then slows, then shrinks, then stops. The shrinking is the tell. Once a species stops pushing outward and begins pulling inward, the internal calculations have already changed. They are no longer asking how to resist. They are asking how much they can afford to give away. Humanity had given away a great deal. The Orion spur was gone. 3 relay stations along the Cashin lane had been quietly abandoned after hegemony customs vessels began running inspection sweeps. The human merchant fleet had rerouted itself twice in 8 months to avoid the new tariff corridors. Each reroute had been logged, analyzed, and filed as a data point confirming the model. The model said, compliant. The model said, no countermeasure capacity. The model said, ready for integration. Malakar had put the report down, finished his mineral water, and authorized the summit. Not because he expected a negotiation, there was nothing to negotiate, the terms were already set, but because the hegemony's administrative doctrine required the species in question to formally acknowledge the transfer of sovereignty. It was tidier. It made the subsequent governance structure easier to implement if the record showed consent, even coerced consent, rather than simple conquest. He had not expected the silence. In his experience, species at this stage of the process sent a different kind of diplomat. Frightened people. People who made small, visible attempts to maintain dignity while their hands trembled. People who asked questions they already knew the answers to, because asking gave the illusion of a negotiation still in progress. Vance had done none of these things. He had arrived, sat down, placed his hands flat on the table, and looked at Malakar with the expression of a man who had already decided something and was simply waiting for the right moment to act on it. Malakar had seen that expression before. He had seen it on his own face, in the reflection of a darkened viewport, the morning he authorized this operation. He filed the observation. He did not change his plans. His algorithms had never been wrong about a species at this stage. Humanity's military registry showed no new construction starts in 14 months. Their research stations along the outer belt had reduced operating staff by 30%. Their council had publicly debated, twice, whether to accept a reduced sovereignty compromise rather than face further economic pressure. The debate itself was the tell. Species that had a real answer did not hold public debates about whether to surrender. They simply did not surrender. The chamber was quiet. Outside, 4,200 dreadnoughts held their positions. The tractor webs on the 3 human transports registered nominal load. The ships were not attempting to maneuver. Their crews had not even powered up their secondary drives. Malakar polished the platinum ring once slowly and found it satisfying. Below him, Envoy Vance reached across the table and poured himself a small measure of water from the carafe at the table's center. He drank it without hurry, set the cup back down in exactly the same position, and resumed looking at the wall above Malakar's head. Waiting. Malakar watched this and felt the first faint edge of something that was not quite irritation. Vance was not performing calm. He was simply calm. That was a different thing. Performed calm had tells, over-careful movements, a slight deliberateness to the breathing, the occasional glance at exits. Vance had none of those. He sat the way people sit when they are in a place they chose to be. Drev appeared at Malakar's shoulder. The integration accords require a biometric acknowledgement from the lead envoy, he said quietly. We need his thumb on the glass. He will provide it, Malakar said. Drev's ear fronds shifted fractionally. He has not looked at the document. Malakar turned back to the chamber. Vance had, in fact, not looked at the document. He was looking at the wall. Specifically, Malakar realized at the small environmental indicator panel set into the wall above the main display screen, a panel that showed atmospheric scrubber status, power routing levels, and station grid sync. The indicator light was green. It had been green when they arrived. It was still green. Malakar looked at it for a moment. Then he looked back at Vance, who had already moved his eyes back to the neutral middle distance and was simply sitting there, hands flat, water cup exactly centered, showing nothing at all. 11 years, the report had said. 11 years of retreating. Malakar touched the ring, turned it once and was certain. Across the galaxy's diplomatic channels, the silence from the human worlds had already lasted 6 days. No counter-broadcast, no emergency assembly session on record, no military alert status filed with the neutral arbitration bodies that tracked such things. The hegemony's monitoring arrays along the border corridors had picked up normal freight traffic, normal agricultural transshipment, normal comm traffic about crop yields, and weather modeling and a sports competition on one of the outer colony stations. Nothing that looked like a species preparing to fight. The Cashin Compact, watching from a careful distance, had filed a private note with its own strategic council. Humanity appeared to have calculated the odds and accepted them. The Marathi sovereignty had sent a quiet inquiry to hegemony administrative offices asking about the timeline for new trade route access through the formerly human Orion Spur, anticipating that the corridor would open once the integration was complete. Everyone who was watching had reached the same conclusion. The math was the math. You could not argue with it. 4,200 dreadnoughts against a merchant fleet that had been rerouting itself for 8 months to avoid customs inspections. A species that had publicly debated surrender. A species that sent its lead diplomat to a summit ring with his hands flat on the table and his eyes on the wall. Quiet, everyone agreed, was what defeat looked like when a species had enough dignity left not to beg. The galaxy waited for the document to be signed. Inside Ethelgard, the environmental indicator above the main display panel continued to glow a steady, unremarkable green. Malachar had already stopped looking at it. The first-line taster had been the size of a thumbnail. Petty Officer Ren Vasari had carried it inside the lining of a standard-issue cargo manifest sleeve, the kind every human merchant crew filed at Valley's Gate Junction when paying the border tariff. The junction at Cashin 7 processed about 400 vessels a month. The automated verification system ran its handshake cycle every time a transponder pinged the network. The cycle took 11 seconds. It was the same 11 seconds every time, because Volley's automation was built for consistency, and consistency was its proudest quality. Vasari had logged the cycle duration in a personal notation file labeled Transit Delays, and sent it home in a routine crew status report. That was the first day of year 1. Nobody at the junction had noticed, because the system was not designed to look for someone doing nothing. Vasari had paid the tariff, filed the manifest, and piloted the freighter out through the gate at standard departure speed. The line taster stayed behind, embedded 11 layers deep in the junction's passive power routing lattice, listening. It had no transmitter, it drew almost no power, it recorded. Project Mirrorweft had a director, a woman named Adiz Okonkwo, and she had run it for 11 years from a sub-basement office on a station that officially housed a cartographic survey team. The station was small enough that the hegemony's assessment files did not include it by name, only by coordinates, and only as a notation. Minimal infrastructure, no strategic value. Okonkwo had found that useful. She had started with a problem that had no good solution. The Volley's hegemony's automated logistics network was the most sophisticated closed-loop system in the known galaxy. It did not have a door you could force. It had no single point of failure you could strike. It had 6 millennia of redundancy engineering built into every junction, every gate, every relay array. A direct attack on any one node would trigger an automatic reroute in under 4 seconds, and the attacking signal would be logged, isolated, and used to harden every subsequent junction against the same approach. You could not break in, but you could listen. The hegemony's automation was proud of its consistency for a reason. Consistency was what made it fast. Every gate junction ran the same verification cycle. Every transit handshake used the same rotating encryption schema, rotating, but on a predictable interval, because predictability was what kept the automated systems synchronized across 6 sectors without requiring constant manual oversight. Human engineers had discovered the interval in year 3. It was 4,096 seconds, long enough to look random, short enough to map. By year 5, Okonkwo had encryption cycle logs from 41 gate junctions. By year 8, she had 207. The data came in slowly in pieces, hidden inside routine tariff filings and crew status reports and automated navigation pings that every merchant vessel sent anyway. Merchant captains who knew what their manifest sleeves contained were told one thing: pay the tariff, file the paperwork, leave on time. Don't look at anything twice. Don't ask questions. Just keep the routes open and keep moving, because if the routes closed, the line tasters went dark. 3 captains had been detained during hegemony customs sweeps in Year 6. Standard inspection. Their vessels were searched. Nothing was found because nothing aboard the vessels was unusual. The line tasters were already at the junctions, and the captains genuinely did not know the technical details of what they had been carrying. They were released after 48 hours. Their files were marked as cleared. Okonkwo had written each of their names in a personal log she kept on paper, not in the system, on paper. Below the name she wrote the word cost and underlined it once. In Year 9, the model was close enough to test. The cartographic survey station ran a controlled simulation, a contained digital replica of a single Volley's gate junction, built entirely from the logged cycle data. The mirror-weft key hit the simulated junction and forced it into maintenance lockdown in under 3 seconds. The lockdown protocol was the hegemony's own, a built-in safety measure designed to freeze a junction's automated functions during a detected software conflict, preventing cascade failure across connected nodes. The engineers had not broken in. They had convinced the system it was protecting itself. Okonkwo had watched the simulation run from her desk, drinking cold tea, and said nothing for a long time after. Then she said, "How many junctions does the sector grid include?" Her lead engineer, a quiet man named Tarbell, had pulled up the mapping data. All transitactive junctions across 3 sectors, approximately 412. And the flagship-class vessels. They sync to the primary sector grid during standard gate transit. They have to, the tractor coordination systems require it. Tarbell had paused. If the grid locks, they lock with it. Then we need 18 months, Okonkwo said, to let the key propagate. She had already picked the summit. Malakar had no way of knowing any of this, which was the point. What he knew, standing on the high dais of Ethelgard at 0952 Summit Standard, was that his algorithms had never failed him, that his fleet was in position, that the vassalage document was sitting on the forward ledge of the dais waiting for a thumbprint, and that the human envoy below him was still not looking at it. Vance had refilled his water cup once. He had not checked his personal comm unit. He had not spoken to the 41 other diplomats seated along the curved table behind the kinetic barrier. They were, all of them, behaving the same way, seated, quiet, hands visible, eyes forward, moving occasionally but without apparent stress. One of the younger diplomats was doing something with a small, smooth stone, turning it between her fingers in a slow, rhythmic loop. Not nervously, the way people handle familiar objects when they are simply waiting. Malakar found himself watching her hands. He made himself stop. "The accords require acknowledgement before the summit hour closes," he said, directing it at Vance. "That is 2 hours and 11 minutes from this moment." Vance looked at him. "I understand the timeline." "You have not reviewed the document." "I've read it." Vance's voice was even, not the careful evenness of someone maintaining composure, just flat, the way a weather report is flat. "We were sent a copy 3 weeks ago." Malakar had not known they were sent a copy. He turned fractionally toward Drev. Drev's expression confirmed it. Administrative staff had transmitted the accords to the Human Diplomatic Office as part of the standard pre-summit disclosure. Standard procedure. Never a concern before, because species at this stage of the process never had time to do anything with advance notice of the terms except dread them. "Then you understand what you are acknowledging," Malakar said. "I understand what you believe I am acknowledging," Vance said. The chamber was quiet for a moment. Malakar turned the ring once. The platinum was warm from his hand. "That is an interesting distinction," he said, "for someone in your position." Vance looked back at the wall above the dais. The environmental indicator was still green. In the 18th month of the propagation phase, the Hegemony flagship Ascendant will transited the Cashin Gate Junction on a standard inspection route. Nobody had arranged this. It was a routine patrol. The vessel's navigation systems pinged the junction's automated verification array as required, received the standard handshake, and continued through the gate at its designated speed. The handshake took 11 seconds. It was, as always, consistent. What the Ascendant Will's diagnostic system logged as a minor automated maintenance routine was, by the time the vessel cleared the transit corridor, already moving through the background file architecture of the ship's secondary systems. Not fast, not visibly. The way groundwater moves through stone, following the path of least resistance, filling available space, going nowhere in particular and everywhere in the end. The routine had no transmitter. It drew almost no power. It waited. Across 3 sectors, in the routing lattices of 411 other junctions, something similar had been waiting for a long time. Waiting for a network link-up. Waiting for a full sector grid sync. Waiting for the automated systems of every connected node to be in contact with each other at the same time, the way they would be when a summit station came online, and linked to the primary grid to support its diplomatic communication arrays. The way Ethelgard would, when its systems synced to confirm the summit was live. The way it had at 09:31 that morning. 16 minutes before Malachar sealed the perimeter fields. The environmental indicator above the main display panel in the summit chamber had turned green at 09:31. It had stayed green. Vance had noticed it at 09:34 from across the room and had taken his seat. He had placed his hands flat on the table. He had poured himself a cup of water he did not hurry to drink. And he had waited. At 14:02 Summit Standard, the atmospheric scrubbers stopped. It was not a dramatic sound. It was the absence of one, the constant low cycling that every pressurized station produced, the sound so continuous that the human brain filed it as silence and forgot it. When it stopped, the chamber felt suddenly larger. Malachar noticed it the way you notice a clock that has been running in the next room when it finally winds down. He looked at the ceiling vents. Nothing moved. "Drev," he said. Drev was already at the secondary console along the chamber wall, running his fingers across the interface. His ear fronds were pressed flat. "Power routing anomaly," he said. "Station grid. I'm getting—" He stopped. "Getting what?" "The console is—" Drev touched the screen again. "Nothing. It's not responding." The golden illumination of the high dais cut out. Not dimmed, not flickered, out. The chamber dropped into the amber half-light of the backup chemical cells, a flat, old-fashioned glow that made the kinetic barrier around the diplomats look darker than it was and turned the data glass tablet on the dais ledge into a pale, unreadable rectangle. Outside the structural ports, the running lights of the nearest dreadnoughts were still visible. They looked normal. They looked fine. Then they didn't. One by one, across Malachar's line of sight through the port glass, the drive glow of the vessels dimmed. Not all at once in sequence, moving outward from the station like a wave crossing still water. The tractor web indicators on the dreadnoughts' hulls, normally a steady blue, went to gray. Then to nothing. The ships were still there. They were simply no longer doing anything. 4,200 warships, and not one of them was answering. Malachar pressed his own console. The biometric reader pulsed once and went dark. He pressed it again. Nothing. Every monitor in Ethelgard came on at once. Not the station's displays. Every screen, the secondary briefing panels, the environmental status boards, the decorative information arrays along the upper gallery that normally showed hegemony administrative bulletins. All of them. The image was the same on each one. The spare, unadorned interior of a ship's command deck, lit in the cool white of functional lighting. A woman seated at the central console, a small ceramic tea vessel on the surface beside her right hand, its glaze the pale blue of something very old and very ordinary. She was not in uniform. She wore a plain duty jacket, the kind of thing a crew member puts on for a long shift when ceremony is not the point. Her hair was cut short and was going gray at the temples. She was looking slightly past the feed, at something on her own console, something she was still monitoring while this conversation happened. She let the silence run for 3 seconds. Then she looked directly into the feed. "Provost Malachar," Admiral Chen said, "your flagship is running a diagnostic. It will be finished shortly. I'd recommend you stay comfortable." Malachar did not move. He understood language, all language, the way anyone does who has spent 6 decades in positions of absolute administrative authority. He parsed her words and found them, at first pass, almost manageable. A diagnostic, a recommendation, the soft, informational cadence of someone delivering a briefing. He looked at his console, black. He looked at the display screens, her face. He looked at the port glass, 4,200 dark ships. He ran the calculation again. The mirror weft, that was what he would have called it if he had known it existed, which he had not. The Hegemony's Strategic Assessment Division had not flagged a single anomalous reading at any gate junction in 11 years of monitoring. No intrusion signature, no unauthorized access event, no variation from predicted automation cycles. That was the point, he realized now, standing very still on the high dais of a summit station that had just locked him out of his own fleet. The variation had been so small at each individual junction that it registered as the normal margin of error. The line tasters had not broken in. They had not forced anything. They had listened, in the spaces the system left open because those spaces were supposed to be empty. His automation was proud of its consistency. His automation was the target. "You have been inside our network," he said. "For 11 years, Chen said. She picked up the ceramic vessel and took a sip unhurried and set it back in the same place. "We don't get angry, Provost. We don't get angry. We get to work." The ring was warm in his hand. He had been polishing it without noticing. He made himself stop. "The flagship," he said. "You said the flagship is running a diagnostic." "The Ascendant will has been running human maintenance routines for 18 months, she said. "It's been treating our command inputs as primary imperial law the entire time. That's not a breach, in the technical sense. Your system accepted the authorization chain voluntarily. It passed the handshake." A pause. Consistently. Malachar's hand moved again before he could stop it. His platinum ring slipped from his fingers. It hit the edge of the console first, a small clean sound, and then rolled slowly, with the particular patient motion of something finding its own level, down the 2 steps of the dais, and came to rest against the bottom stair. Face up. The crest of the Hegemony's administrative authority, pressed into metal older than most of the species the Hegemony had absorbed, sitting on the floor of a station it no longer controlled. He looked at it. He did not pick it up. "The Ascendant will is not the only vessel running that routine," Chen said. She had not changed her expression. She had not raised her voice. She was speaking in the same tone a person uses to walk through the steps of a procedure they have performed many times. Every flagship-class vessel that transited a gate junction in the past 18 months received the same maintenance file. The propagation was automatic. Your automation handled it. She glanced at something to her left. "You have 106 flagship-class vessels in your 3-sector fleet. All of them are currently completing the same diagnostic." Malachar said nothing. The backup chemical lighting made everything amber and quiet. "The agricultural distribution hubs in sectors 4, 5, and 6 are on the same grid lock," Chen continued. The shipyard relay systems along the cache and spine, the automated resupply arrays for your border patrol network. She tilted her head slightly. Not the life support on any of those installations. We were careful about that. The people on those stations are breathing normally. They're just not going anywhere. You are telling me, Malachar said slowly, that you have locked my entire sector infrastructure. I'm telling you what you can verify yourself, she said, when your console comes back online, in about 4 minutes. 4 minutes? He would have full read access in 4 minutes, and what he would read would confirm every word she had just said. A sector grid lockout across agricultural, military, and logistics systems, executed without a single fired weapon, without a single kinetic event, without a single breach that his security architecture would have recognized as a breach, because it had all gone in through the front door with the correct handshake. 11 years. His algorithms had classified 11 years of human silence as systemic brokenness. His predictive models had flagged decreasing human construction starts, reduced station staffing, 2 public council debates about partial sovereignty concessions. His models had looked at all of that and said, compliant, no countermeasure capacity, ready for integration. His models had been doing the math on the wrong numbers. This was the open loop that Malachar would spend the next several hours unable to close. It was not that the humans had been deceptive. Deception required active concealment, required effort, required the deceiving party to do something they did not normally do. Vasari had paid tariffs. Merchant crews had filed manifests. Border vessels had transited gate junctions. All of it was exactly what they were supposed to do, exactly as they were supposed to do it, with one small addition each time that looked, at every individual junction, like nothing at all. They had not hidden inside his system. They had walked in through the door he left open, the one he was proud of, the one that proved his automation was consistent and precise and utterly reliable. On the console screen in front of him, the 4-minute timer Chen had mentioned had not appeared yet, but a different counter had small in the upper left corner of his primary display, which had come back online on its own to show him this one thing, a red numeral counting down. 12 minutes. He did not know yet what it was counting toward. He would find out in approximately 40 seconds, when Chen finished her tea. Chen finished her tea in the way people finish things they have been holding for a while, not hurried, not ceremonial, just done. She set the ceramic vessel back on the console surface. The pale blue glaze caught the light from her command deck and held it. The counter you are looking at, she said, will reach 0 in 11 minutes and 20 seconds. She folded her hands. If it does, the operational firmware of every locked installation in your 3-sector grid will be permanently erased. Not disabled, erased. The agricultural distribution network, the shipyard relay systems, the border patrol resupply arrays, all of it will require a complete rebuild from base code. She paused. We have estimated that at your current industrial output, that process would take between 8 and 11 years. Malachar looked at the counter. He did not look at the ring on the floor. You want the document destroyed, he said. The vassalage integration accords, Chen said. Yes, destroyed in this chamber on this feed before the counter reaches 0, not filed as rejected, destroyed. We want the record to show that it never reached completion. And the Orion resource arrays. Vacated. Your installations removed from every station in that corridor within 48 hours of this conversation. Not renegotiated, not deferred to a secondary commission. She looked at the feed steadily. Removed. You are also requiring a broadcast. An unencrypted apology to the United Earth Assembly, Chen said, delivered in your voice, not a statement of clarification, an apology. Malachar was silent for a moment. And if I comply with all 3 conditions? Then the counter stops, Chen said. The grid unlocks. Your fleet comes back online. Your ships leave this system under their own power. She did not change her expression. The 42 people in that chamber behind you board their transports and go home. That is all. That is all. The amber backup lighting made no sound. Outside the structural ports, 4,200 ships sat dark and still. Malachar looked at them, really looked at them, the way he had not done since the drive glow faded, because looking at them until this moment had been an exercise in confirming what he already knew and did not want confirmed. They were exactly where he had positioned them. They had not moved. They were simply not his anymore, in any functional sense, and had not been for the last 18 months. He had been the one who authorized the summit. He had been the one who selected Ethelgard specifically because of its neutral status and its deep space location, far from any human resupply corridor. He had chosen it because it gave him every tactical advantage. He had not known that Ethelgard's communication arrays would sync to the primary sector grid the moment the station came online for the summit. He had not known that the sync would be the final link in a chain that had been building quietly for 11 years. He had chosen the location. He had handed them the last piece. "You waited," he said. "Yes," Chen said. "You waited until I had assembled the fleet, until I had every asset in position." He looked at her. "You could have used this at any point in the last several years." "We could have," she said. "You waited until I made the move." Chen looked at him for a moment. "We don't get angry, Provost. We don't get angry. We get to work." She glanced at something to her left, her own counter, presumably the same numbers from a different angle. "You have 10 minutes and 40 seconds. No warning, no declaration." The thing humanity had built over 11 years was not a weapon in any shape Malachar's doctrine recognized. It had no yield. It had no targeting system. It had no launch vector. It was a key, made entirely from the hegemony's own consistency, carried in through the hegemony's own front door, by people who paid their tariffs on time and filed their paperwork correctly and then went home. His algorithms had modeled for fleet counters, for industrial output ratios, for diplomatic leverage and economic pressure, and the staged withdrawal patterns of species under maximum systemic stress. They had not modeled for patience. No algorithm he had ever run had included a variable for a species that took 11 years of real damage, 3 genuine border retreats, real resource concessions, stations genuinely reduced in staff, council debates about partial sovereignty that were not performance, but were in fact the honest, difficult conversations of a people choosing to hold on long enough, and used every single year of it as operational cover. His algorithms had seen a species shrinking. They had been watching a species aim. Malachar crouched down and picked up the ring. He held it in his palm, not on his finger. The counter read 9 minutes and 12 seconds when he looked up at his attaché. Drev was standing very still at the secondary console, which remained dark, and he was watching Malachar with the expression of someone who has run out of procedural responses and is waiting to be told what the next one is. "Get me the document," Malachar said. Drev retrieved the data glass tablet from the dais ledge. Malachar looked at it for a moment, at the accords, the full text, 6 pages of administrative language that had taken his legal staff 4 months to draft and that had been, he now understood, read in its entirety by every member of the human diplomatic team 3 weeks before they arrived here. They had come knowing exactly what was in it. They had come with their hands flat on the table and their eyes on the wall indicator and their water cups exactly centered. He pressed his thumb to the destruction authorization panel on the tablet's lower edge. The data glass went white, then clear, then dark. The accords were gone. "The broadcast," he said to Drev. "Open an unencrypted channel to the United Earth Assembly frequency." Below the dais, behind the kinetic barrier, Envoy Vance was looking at Malachar for the first time since the lights had gone out. Not with satisfaction, not with visible relief. He looked at Malachar the way he had looked at him from the beginning, with the expression of a man who had already decided something and was watching events confirm it. The barrier came down. The 42 diplomats stood in sequence, the same unhurried movement they had used to sit, and began walking toward the chamber exit. None of them looked at the dark screens. None of them looked at the structural ports where the ships were still dark and still. One of the younger diplomats, the woman who had turned the smooth stone between her fingers, tucked it into her jacket pocket as she rose and followed the others without breaking stride. She had been doing it for the same reason Okonkwo kept names on paper instead of in the system. Vance was the last one through the door. He paused in the threshold for one moment and looked back at the dais, not at Malachar, at the spot where the platinum ring had been lying. Then he left. The door closed. The transports cleared Ethelgard's docking corridor at 14:31 Summit Standard, 29 minutes after the scrubbers stopped. They did not burn hard for distance. They moved at a measured, standard departure velocity, the kind of speed a vessel uses when it is leaving a place it has every right to leave. No evasive patterns, no sprint to jump range. They simply went. Behind them, 4,200 dreadnoughts remained exactly where they were. Dark, engines cold. The tractor web systems that had locked onto the human transports an hour before were not released as the transports departed. They were simply no longer functioning, and the transports moved through them the way objects move through things that are no longer there. Malachar stood on the dais of a station he still technically commanded, watching the transport drives become small and then smaller and then not visible through the port glass. In his hand, the platinum ring, not on his finger, in his palm, held loosely. His console had come back online at 14:19, as Chen had said it would, and he had read the full scope of the sector lockdown in the 4 minutes before the countdown reached 0 and stopped. Every figure was exactly as she had described it. 411 junctions, 106 flagship-class vessels, agricultural distribution across 3 sectors, shipyard relay systems along the Kashan spine, the automated resupply arrays for the entire border patrol network. All of it logged, confirmed, and currently held by a key his own system had accepted as legitimate. He could have it back. He would have it back when the release codes were processed. Humanity was going to give it back. That was, somehow, the part he could not fit into any model he had. They had been inside his network for 11 years. They had propagated a complete sector lockout architecture into his flagship and every vessel in his vanguard fleet. They had walked his lead diplomat into a trap of his own design and sat him down with his hands flat on the table and a cup of water and waited for him to finish. And they were going to give it back. They were not going to hold the sector grid. They were not going to demand ongoing access. They were not going to use the leverage of demonstrated capability to extract further concessions beyond the 3 terms Chen had named. They had said what they would do and what they would not do, and the 2 lists were exactly the same length. It would have been, he thought, almost reassuring. Except for the 72 hours. For 3 days after the transports cleared the sector, the hegemony's fleet sat in the dark. Not because it had to. The release codes had been processed. The grid was unlocked. The flagship systems were back under hegemony control. The dreadnought's drive cores could have been brought online within the hour. Humanity had not extended the lockout. They had simply not rushed to confirm that everything was working, and without that confirmation, Malachar's technical staff would not authorize a full-power restart of the fleet's core systems on the grounds that an incomplete release could cause cascade failure across the network drives. So the fleet waited. For 72 hours, 4,200 dreadnoughts, the most powerful mobile force in 3 sectors, sat cold and dark in the space around a neutral summit station, unable to move, while the people who had put them there traveled home at standard departure speed without looking back. On the second day, The Cashin Compact filed a quiet note with its own strategic council, retracting its earlier assessment that humanity had calculated the odds and accepted them. On the third day, the Marathi sovereignty withdrew its inquiry about trade route access through the Orion Spur. On the 72nd hour, the fleet came back online. The lights returned, the drives hummed, the tactical displays repopulated with the sensor data that had been accumulating, unread, for 3 days. Everything was as it had been, except that nothing was as it had been. In the primary record system of the Vali's Hegemony Strategic Assessment Division, an automated update protocol flagged the species designation file for H. sapiens and queued it for review. The old strategic doctrine, developmental case, no countermeasure capacity, ready for integration, was marked deprecated. The update took a clerk 4 days to draft and 2 senior administrators to approve, because the new category did not exist yet and had to be created. They called it what the data indicated. They did not embellish it. They wrote it as a plain administrative fact, the kind the hegemony had used for 6 millennia to describe the things it found in the galaxy and needed to remember. The new designation read, the patient species. Malachar read the update in his office on a Thursday morning, alone. He set the platinum ring on the desk beside his screen. He did not put it on. He read the line again. Outside his office, in the long corridor that led to the administrative chambers of the hegemony's central command, his staff moved through their routines, filing, briefing, processing, managing. The same smooth, efficient motion of a system that had run for 6,000 years and expected to run for 6,000 more. Malachar looked at the ring on his desk. He looked at the line on his screen. The universe expected an empire to break in fire. It found out what happens when one simply freezes. He did not polish the ring. He did not pick it up. He left it there,